Starting out this week, I really enjoyed the reading from our postmodern career counseling book. In Chapter 10, Pamela Brott of 2017 explored how history has shaped the way people expect careers to form, as well as where it could be heading. Brott explains that baby boomers grew up in a time of civil rights, marches, hippies, and assassinations of different prominent political figures. With each generation, I think about what challenges they might have faced or what movements and stuff like that, and where it could affect future generations. Over the weekend, I went to DC, our nation's capital, and during one of our tours, our guide mentioned something about how millennials are changing and shaping the neighborhoods in different ways, that they want to have everything in one place. Work, shop, play, raise your children, and everything in between, all where you live, they were talking about. I saw an example of this with a bike shop that also operated as a coffee shop and a hardware store. It was a very odd mix, but I can see where if you live in that area, it could be really helpful if you do those things or need like a one-stop shop, literally. I bring this up as a way to begin to explore how coming generations might expect having career and living arrangements in a very similar way. From listening to some of my peers and seeing some individuals who are a little older than me, I see them wanting to work close to home, if not mobily, like right on the spot or from home. Chapter 10 came as a sort of reinforcement of what I've been learning and thinking about over the weekend in Washington, as well as some of the things we've been talking about in this course. Gave me thoughts about where, as a counselor, we might see the workforce heading over the next few years. Thinking about that, my own personal career choice of being an art therapist and counselor is very different from my parents and that of my grandparents. My mother and father are from Indiana, a small town where factory jobs mainly were common up until about the last 20 or 30 years or so. My mother was the first in her family to go to college. She went for counseling, and now she's basically the accountant, secretary, receptionist, HR personnel, and vice president of the landscaping company in which she works. My father, like many other people in his own family, enlisted. He spent 2 years in the Army and 19 years in the United States Air Force. He and my mother were both stationed in the Netherlands, where they kind of traveled and did some other things like that. He works in technology, and currently, after retiring, he was basically at the same job he was at before he retired, and then now he's working at a clinic helping with the technology systems over there. My grandfather on my father's side was a handyman, jack of all trades, and he kind of did that until his passing after his own military service. I don't know much about my grandmother on my father's side, but my mother's parents I am very close to. My grandmother spent most of her working career working in a school system, planning trainings and events for local teachers. My grandfather worked in a factory until he was cut due to the union ruining everything, which it kind of took a lot of the factories out of that small Indiana town due to unions and just costs of those who owned the factory. From there, he drove a truck for Snyder, and I remember loving climbing into the cabin of the semi and playing around in it. But he did say that it was long days and long periods of time away from his family, which was very hard and challenging for him. He currently is retired and part-time drives for the company in which my grandmother works. I know that my great-grandparents on my mother's side, they all kind of did farming, and my great-grandmother, who died at 103, had a general store in which people would come to. Indiana is a very different place than that of New Jersey and what I have known. So it's very interesting when I go back in summertime and see some of my cousins or my friends and see the way they are living. Sometimes I envy their life, and I feel that I'm still in this tutorial phase at 24, still being in school, but also being the only one in my family on all sides to have gone to graduate school and to be pursuing this further education. I think it's a great thing to compare and to reflect upon when heading into this counseling field. I feel this anxiety of wanting to start my life, but also I enjoy this kind of the tutorial phase of learning. I pay some bills on my own, but I am still supported by my parents, and I think about how different my mother's life was at, she married at 22, so at my age, her time, she was married for 2 years, and she was traveling Europe and working. When thinking about all this, I think it's important to use this family career genogram when working with a client in career interviews. I come from a family that had a great variety in different careers, but also heavily militarily influenced and traditional based. Going into the creative arts and counseling it fits very well with my personality, and my family is very accepting of it, but it's very different from anything that they have done. When thinking of my own family genogram and where to go from there when working with a client, I found Schultz and Jung's process of motivational interviewing and career counseling to be helpful. Their explanation of the process helped me to think about how I would apply them in my own sessions when working with a client who wants to seek counseling for their careers. Establishing the therapeutic relationship under process 1 is very important because it enables you to build trust with this client, and after trust is built, the client will be more likely to share information that you could then use to influence the way you do things with them in treatment. In a client assessment, we can see how ready the client is to make change or make movement towards certain careers. It can be beneficial to see where a client is coming from, and we could develop a plan to better help them. In the process 3, we would talk about discrepancies, basically. So I think this is very important because it is hard for us to talk about things that make us uncomfortable or that could be challenging. I think back to our DSM course where Nicole had talked to us about like the sexual dysfunctions and disorders and other like nuancy like disorders, stuff like that, that made some of us uncomfortable. I think that it is good for us to talk about these things openly, because if we're uncomfortable talking about it as people, as clinicians, then that comes across to our clients, which affects that therapeutic relationship where they might not want to share certain things. So it is important to talk about where these things might not line up. In the process 4, I can see it being a challenge for me, as it kind of talks about like resistance to treatment with clients. I often feel myself struggling with people, or in this case clients, not liking me. If I feel resistance from client, I might want to have to investigate where my own countertransference is coming from and why it is important for me to feel that they need to like me or that they need to follow everything that I'm saying. Meeting their resistance to change is also important, as it is a way for us to better investigate their own worries and that resistance, so as to see why they might be hesitant to make these moves in their careers. In process 5, it is about addressing a client's self-efficacy. It is important because I think about how they were talking about the phrasing and of acknowledging the client's own personal feelings instead of saying good job or that's great, really saying like, oh, you might be feeling you're proud. I see that you're proud of this accomplishment that you have done for yourself. Sometimes we might work hard with a client and they don't get the job or the promotion that they've worked so hard for. In process, the next process, it talks about establishing empathy, and I think that this is important because it is a way for us to work with a client in that potential letdown, because we all know rejection stinks, and we need to be able to work with clients to do these things. I believe working with a client to develop a family genogram for the careers is very important, as well as practicing motivational career interviewing, because it can help the client to achieve their goals. It can help them to feel accomplished. If these goals are met and there is another need for treatment or other areas of advancement, we reach termination. Termination could be challenging, but knowing that we might have helped a client reach their goals, to me, is something that has greater importance than holding on to them. Still, there are many things that I need to learn about career counseling and counseling overall, but this week, with the discussions, the readings, and my trip to DC, has brought about many concepts that will need further thought moving forward. Thank you.